we're getting hit with the biggest solar flares
Oh, wow.
than the last 19 years.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if the people can find us again because we had a lot of people on chat, but we're back on.
All
So,
right.
okay. But, again, with this cave and these red haired giants and stuff like that. And, I'm kind of familiar around Reno. Boy, I used to ride my motorcycle there with my sons and go up to
Mhm.
Virginia City.
Mhm.
Is it anywhere near Virginia City or is it?
Yes. Yes. And there are some artifacts in Carson City that came out of that cave as well. And the peoples that inhabited around Lovelock Cave, they were known from the Paiutes, they gave them different names. They were known as the Conquerors and also as the People Eaters. It was a tribe that were giants and they had red hair and they were cannibalistic. They would attack the other tribes in that area and they would cannibalize their victims. Sometimes they would even eat the dead. And finally, the Paiutes got tired of being attacked and they banded together with other local tribes and they waged war on these giants that lasted 3 years. And finally, they cornered the last of these giants at Lovelock Cave and they gave him an ultimatum. They threw brush in front of the cave and they said, "Why don't you live as men?" And there was no response that came out of the cave. And so the Paiutes lit flaming arrows and they caught the brush on fire and burnt the giants to death.
Oh, wow. How tall were these giants reported to be?
Well, in one of the official archaeological records at Lovelock Cave, there's very brief mention of actual skeletons that were found. They did mention one that was 6 foot 6 inches tall, and that mummy was actually given to a fraternal lodge to be boiled and used for initiation purposes, and that's in the archaeological record. And all the other skeletons and everything that came out of the cave disappeared out of the public view. And I was shocked when I read that. I thought that is so strange that all these skeletons that came out of the cave disappeared, but there is reference one skeleton and it was given to a fraternal lodge, for goodness sake, to be used in initiation purposes.
Oh, boy. We have lost so much important history of different cultures because of different things like that.
Absolutely. And also, as I mentioned earlier, there are skulls that allegedly came out of that cave that ended up in a small museum called Humboldt Museum, and they were never put on public display. They were kept in cupboards, and you had to ask the curator to look at these skulls. And I thought that was very unusual. Why were these skulls never displayed? And a researcher by the name of Don Monroe, about 50 years ago, he was at that Humboldt Museum, and the curator showed him the skulls. He took a picture of one in particular, and I have a photograph of it in my book, and it was massive. You could see it next to some smaller skulls, and it was huge. And in the upper row of teeth, it had extra teeth called, in dental terms, it's called supernumerary teeth. So almost like a double set of teeth. And I thought that is so strange because I had read in other accounts of these giants, even in the Bible, it talks about when David and his mighty men were battling some of these giants. It references one giant in particular. He had a double set of teeth and he had 6 digits on each hand.
That is very interesting. In the Middle East, a lot of the service people came back, not the first time we were there with a war, in Iraq, but the first time actually. And they were talking about, rumors of giants.
Yes, I think there was a story going around about the Kandahar giant. Are you referring to that where some of the army soldiers actually killed one of these giants?
Yeah. Is that similar to what we're talking about?
It is similar. I can't say for sure that was necessarily a true story, but the descriptions of it was that it was a large giant. It had reddish hair, and it was very violent. It killed some of the soldiers, and they found bones of other missing soldiers in that cave. So it was cannibalistic. And it sounds very similar to the red-haired giants because they were cannibalistic. And there was human bones found in that cave when it was excavated, and the marrow had been sucked out.
Well, that tells you that they had some taste for, meat. Not just in Reno, but, in Idaho and Montana, they have supposedly at different times found remains of giants.
All over North America, and I document some of those in my book. I actually include some of the articles. In the Ohio Valley, there's a lot of these giant skeleton discoveries associated with the mound building cultures of that area.
Well, has there ever been any DNA testing of any of the remains of whatever they have left?
I don't think there has been, because the story with that, Gary, is that a lot of times when these skeletons are discovered, even in the articles, it'll reference organizations like the Smithsonian Institute showing up and confiscating the remains, and then they're never seen again. And in fact, I've came across a number of articles, and I'll talk about those. In particular, there was one in Arizona where a rancher found an enormous skull on his property, and it was huge. It was way beyond the size of a normal human skull, and he reported it. And the Smithsonian Institution dispatched 2 agents to check this skull out. They took photos of it, measurements, and in the article it says it was incomprehensible, the size, beyond anything human. And they tried to acquire the skull from this rancher, and he refused to part with it. In fact, I think the title of the article was "A Man Refuses to Give Giant Skeleton to Smithsonian."
Did anything happen to the rancher or farmer?
That I don't know. I don't have any other documentation of whatever happened to the rancher or whatever happened to the skull that he had.
That's a scary thing, because when they have recovered, when they do recover it, you think it would be put on display, but no, it disappears. And then if you inquire about it, we don't know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true, Gary. And there was another article that I referenced. This was back in the late 1800s. I believe his name was Fred Rosslyn, acquired a giant, and it was a mummified giant. This was in California, and it was close to 9 feet tall. And he acquired it from some miners who found it, and then he had a sideshow, and he would display this giant. And the Smithsonian caught wind of it, and they actually sent some agents there to look at it. They looked at this giant mummy, almost 9 feet tall, and it had an elongated skull, which was another interesting feature about it. And they purchased that mummy from Fred Ross, and they gave him like $500. And back then, that's like equivalent to $14,000 or $15,000 today.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And so they bought it from him, and then later on, they claimed they tested the mummy, and they said that it was a fake and that it was gelatin. And I thought it was so interesting, number one, that the Smithsonian has always come out and said, well, giants aren't real. These reports are false. Well, if that's the case, then why are you trying to acquire these things? And why are you paying a considerable amount of money at the time to acquire them?
Well, the other thing they have a tendency to do, like you mentioned, they discredit the findings and the person who actually found it. Again, there's people have found giant skulls, which are about 3 times the size of a human. And the same thing, they take it and it never appears. The same with little people too. The same thing that they take the remains of that, and then no record of it after that.
Gary, you're absolutely right, and I ran into a lot of that. And there was another article that I included in there. It was about the discovery of a giant skull in Texas, and I really wanted to highlight this article because it had an actual photograph of the skull. And when you're researching on these giant skeleton discoveries, it is very hard to find any kind of photographic evidence. But in this particular article, it shows the skull next to 2 other normal size skulls. And Gary, this skull was almost twice the size of these skulls. And that skull disappeared. It disappeared. It was never really put on public display. And I started researching it, and found out that the University of Texas has the skull, and they claim that yes, we have the skull, but no, it's not a giant skull. There was just a poor reconstruction job done on it, and that's why it looks so big. Right, right. It didn't even pass the smell test. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm looking at the original newspaper article that came out about this back in, I believe maybe it was the 50s. And it shows a photograph of that giant skull next to normal sized skulls.
Well, I got an answer for you. You know what it is, Floyd?
What is it, Gary?
They used a photographic enlarger and enlarged it.
Right, there you go.
Bad joke. Bad joke.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, again, with these giants, how about other American native tribes? Do they have similar legends of red-haired giants?
That's a good question, Gary. Yes. In fact, I reference in my book Clifford Mahooty, the late Clifford Mahooty. He was a Zuni elder, and he did speak about the red-haired giants and that there were other giants. In fact, most Native American tribes will talk about giants, and they'll also talk about little people as well. And Clifford said that he had a friend that was an amateur archaeologist, and he would go out in the deserts of Nevada and other places, and he knew where some of these burial grounds were of these red-haired giants, but he wouldn't tell anybody because he knew what would happen if he did, that the archaeologists would come in and they would confiscate the bones, and then they would disappear.
Again, too, with the bones, depending on, places like in Idaho, Montana, which they have found bones, eventually they're going to go back to nothing. But, when you go to like places like Nevada and places where it's dry, or the Middle East, those things will last for centuries.
They're mummified, right?
Yeah.
Naturally.
And they don't degrade, from the moisture and all that stuff, which takes a toll on it. But here's the thing with these ancient skeletons and all this other stuff and all these other races, do they kind of tie into any other folklore on the world of giants that have the red hair? Because I know that the red-haired giants in the Middle East and biblical times, the red-haired giants.
Yes, Gary. Yeah, there's mention of them all throughout the world. I mean, in the Bible itself, I mean, many people are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. And in the Bible itself, it says that Goliath was a remnant, a descendant of the Nephilim. And Nephilim is a Proto-Hebrew word meaning fallen ones. And giants are mentioned a lot in the Bible if you know where to look. And obviously, one of the main places is Genesis 6, and I'm just paraphrasing it. There were giants in the earth in those days and thereafter. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore them children, and they became mighty men, men of renown. And after that passage, then you start getting into where the Lord is talking about how there was so much violence on the earth, and man had become so corrupted that he regretted that he created us, and that's why he brought about the great flood. Well, this ties into a book, an apocryphal book that was left out of the Bible called the Book of Enoch. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yes.
Right. And in the Book of Enoch, he was a great-grandfather of Noah. And so Book of Enoch really gets into the story of what happened, what happened with these giants, how did they come to be? And in the Book of Enoch, it talks about a group of 200 watchers, which were angels that made a pact with each other. They were fallen angels, and they were attracted to the women of the earth, and they came down to the earth and they interbred with the women, and they taught mankind arts that God didn't want us to know, knowledge that he didn't want us to know. And what happened was the women bore these giants. And I believe that is the Book of Enoch is kind of the backstory to Genesis 6, where it says the sons of God. Well, who were the sons of God, right? I believe that they were these fallen angels. And if you look in the biblical text, particularly in Job, it makes references to the sons of God. And there's one reference where it says the sons of God approached the throne of the Lord, and Lucifer was with them, or Satan was with them, right? So they approached the throne of the Lord. These weren't humans that were approaching the throne of the Lord. They were the sons of God. They were angelic beings. And there's another reference as well that said, at the creation of the foundations of the earth, the sons of God shouted for joy, right? Humankind wasn't around. That's referring to angelic beings. So I believe that they were the fallen ones. They were fallen angels, and they intermixed their genetics with the human women, producing this race of giants. And the giants were violent, and they were subjugating the humans. They were waging war on humans amongst themselves. The book of Enoch even says they were corrupting the plant and animal life. And then God wanted to wipe them out, and so he brought the flood. And I also think that ties back into the Genesis 6 account. There were giants in the earth, right? There were giants in the earth, and then there were giants after. So there were giants before the flood, and there were a remnant of them after the flood, and that's where we get Goliath, right? Like individuals like Goliath or King Og of Bashan. He was another giant mentioned in the Bible. He had a bed, an iron frame bed that was 13 feet long and about 6 feet wide to support his girth.
Wow. But another thing too, why was the giants feared? And they wanted also, from what research I've done, they wanted to be worshipped by humans.
Yes. Yeah, they wanted to basically be worshipped like gods, and they really didn't treat humans well. And you find that in a lot of different cultures, like in South America, you find traditions like that as well, that there were these giants. They were powerful. They made slaves of the human. They committed a lot of sin, and then they were punished by God.
Well, too, didn't they kind of like breed humans at one point, or and treat them like livestock for their dinner?
Absolutely, they did. I mean, the red-haired giants of Lovelock Cave, they were cannibals. They would even dig pit traps, because the native peoples in that area, they would try to avoid them during the day, and then they would travel at night, and these red-haired giants would actually dig. I remember you mentioned something about snake holes earlier in the show in Nevada. Well, the red-haired giants had their pit traps where they would capture these other tribes people, and then they would cannibalize them.
That is so scary too. Like the Muckleshoot. When I talked to the medicine woman, this is going back maybe 8-9 years ago, maybe even more. I'm getting old. Even with the Bigfoot, she said that they would come into the village, and take the squaws and the babies and run off with them. And then the warriors would go after them, and then at times they would find remains of their loved ones. And not just that, like they would be down at the river, like washing clothes, and they would have their babies down there with them. Mm-hmm. And again, the Bigfoot would come as a group, and kidnap the people, not just to kidnap them, but they loved eating them.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. What's interesting, another interesting aspect of Lovelock Cave is not only some photographic evidence of these giant skulls that are no longer around, because the museum claim that they were removed probably about 8 or 9 years ago from the NAGPRA Act. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. That was enacted in the 90s.
Well, can you explain that to the listeners?
Yeah, it was a Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, and that was enacted back in the 90s. So if an archaeological dig found like Native American remains, or if a museum was displaying Native American remains, they had to repatriate those remains back to the tribes. So a lot of the skeletal remains that were in museums were repatriated back to the tribes. And so when I contacted the Humboldt Museum to go look at the skulls, they said, we don't have them anymore. They were repatriated, and they're no longer here. So I wasn't able to actually physically see the skulls, but I do have some photographic evidence from Don Monroe, some really good photos of that particular giant skull that he saw about 50 years ago.
Very interesting. Now, Floyd, we need to take a break. It's about 4 minutes long. We're going to come back and talk more about redhead giants. So
right.
I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. So stay tuned. Yeah. You're watching Night Dreams Talk Radio. Again, if you're on YouTube, make sure you give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, and tell your friends about us. If you're listening on Apple or one of the other ones, again, tell your friends about us. We'll be right back with Floyd, so stay tuned.
(2025), a year of false flags or impending contact? Do narratives hidden in the Bible and indigenous stories reveal what happened last time humanity was in contact with extraterrestrial intelligence? From international best-selling author Paul Wallace, The Eden Enigma and The Invasion of Eden. Archaeological sites, enigmatic carvings, and ancient texts reveal answers from the dawn of civilization. Harvard professor of astrophysics Avi Loeb says Paul Wallace provides a fascinating answer. Eric von Daniken says enlightening and persuasive. The Invasion of Eden and The Eden Enigma, available now on Amazon. You are listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, the home of Night Dreams Talk Radio, with Gary Anderson, syndicated worldwide. Paranormal Talk Radio, like you remember.
And we are back with Floyd. Can I ask you a question? Could there still be any, of these beings walking around in the woods somewhere?
Gary, I think the answer to that question is yes. I live in Bigfoot country. I live in the Pacific Northwest. And, when you think of Bigfoot, I mean, they're described many times as being, 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet tall. So in effect, they are giants. And I do believe in their existence. I have a next door neighbor who had 2 encounters with a Bigfoot about 40 minutes from where I live. And they were very detailed encounters with multiple witnesses. And he is a very credible individual. So yeah, I believe that there are giants that still walk among us today.
And that is the scary part. You're not going to find them at your local campground. I can tell you that.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. There were some interesting artifacts that came out of Lovelock Cave, and one in particular, because we're kind of on the subject of Bigfoot. I was in communication with a Nevada State anthropologist, and he sent me a photograph of an alleged Bigfoot print, a huge footprint, and he had a Thule sandal, and Thule is a water plant. It's a Thule sandal that came out of Lovelock Cave, and it fit that Bigfoot print. And there is a documented archaeological account of a sandal. I believe it was about 17 inches in length. And I translated to the shoe size, and that comes out to about a size 29 foot, 29 shoe.
I don't even know any basketball players with that size.
No, I looked at all the records, and there was nothing comparable to that.
Very interesting. Now, in this Lovelock Cave, is there any drawings or anything inside the cave or anything?
Excellent question, Gary. To my knowledge, there wasn't any mentioned in the early discoveries of it. There are giant black spots in the cave that look like there was a fire, a massive fire in the cave, which would correlate with the description of the Paiute shooting the flaming arrows in there. Interesting, there were a couple of researchers, one of them being Don Monroe, that did discover a huge handprint that was on the cave wall a number of years back. And then like they went back to, they photographed it, and I have a photo of it in my book, and it's a massive hand, probably three or four times the size of a normal hand. And they came back like a year later to look at that again, and the handprint was gone.
I wonder if somebody got in there and removed it.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder.
How about fire pits? Because again, I don't know if they had the capability of fire, but if they did, inside the cave where they were living, maybe they were having and cooking their barbecue there.
Right, and we can guess what they were barbecuing, correct?
Well, it wasn't my Aunt Bertha, but yeah, that's the scary part too.
That's the scary part. In some of the Paiute traditions today, I heard an interview of a Paiute lady that lives in that area, and so the stories that were passed down to her, she said the favorite part that the red-haired giants like to eat of the humans were the thighs.
Ah. Now, have they any excavations of the cave that you're knowledge of?
There was a few. There was a year later, after the initial discovery in 1911, so in 1912, there was an excavation, and I think back in the 20s there was an excavation, and I believe there was another one in the 60s. So there was a lot of artifacts that came out, but none of the skeletons were ever put on display. They just disappeared. And there was a couple other artifacts that were very interesting. There was a giant pestle, a grinding stone that was found near the cave, and it was way larger than your normal pestle. This pestle weighed between 35 and 45 pounds. And I remember reading an archaeological report on it, and even the archaeologist was saying this is a much, much larger pestle than we normally see.
Yeah, well, you'd have to be huge to use it.
You'd have to be massively strong to use that. And I guess there was some other clothing, woven clothing out of these tule plants that was they were very large. It looked like it fit a very large person.
Well, again, with the American natives who decided they had enough and set fire at the front of the cave to eliminate them. How long is there any folklore how long that was going on, where these giants were, just attacking them and taking them?
Yeah, I know that they said there was 3 years of war with these giants, and in that area there was a chief. His name was Chief Winnemucca. And he had a daughter named Sarah Winnemucca. And Sarah, she would travel around. This was like in the 1800s and late 1800s. And she would do lectures, talking to people about the Paiute traditions. And she even spoke about these red-haired giants. And she said that she had a dress that was adorned with the red hair of some of these giants.
Now, what was the height of these? Because I read all the way up to 7-8 feet tall. What was the average height reported of these, supposedly?
Well, the Paiutes, they said they were giant. In the archaeological record, the only one skeleton that they mention is 6'6". However, there was no other skeletons ever reported or shown to the public other than that skull in Humboldt Museum that was enormous, that allegedly came out of that cave. Now, I think I found the newspaper article that corresponds to that particular skull, it was found in a ranch near that area. And in that newspaper article, it said it was close to 8 feet in height, and it still had some red hair attached to the skull. And I believe that newspaper article I found is the backstory for that one skull that was once housed in Humboldt Museum. And interesting enough, Gary, that when I started studying that skull from Humboldt Museum, I compared it with the skull that I referenced earlier in Texas. They called it the Voorhees skull, that big skull, the one they said it's big because they did a poor reconstruction job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I looked at those two skulls, and they're almost identical, Gary. Very, very, very similar in structure, with the massive jaw bones, the cheekbones, and the huge eyes.
Yeah, the eyes. That's what's really captivating when you see one of these skulls or a picture of it.
Yeah, so this gets really interesting because these giant skulls now kind of tie into a more recent discovery in 2010 in Siberia. There was a discovery of a skull and a knuckle, or actually a tooth and a knuckle bone that came out of that cave. It's called the Denisovans. The scientists say they are a new species of us. Have you heard of them?
No. Can you explain a little bit more? What you can?
Absolutely, Gary. Yeah. So that was back in 2010 in Siberia. They were excavating a cave, and the archaeologists found a tooth, and it was so large that he initially thought it was the tooth of a cave bear. It was that big. And then he found a rather large knuckle bone. He did find some artifacts, a beautiful green stone bracelet that had 8-millimeter holes drilled through it, and some other artifacts. And so the DNA sequencing showed that that tooth wasn't from a cave bear. It was from a hominid, an upright walking, being, and that they could have been possibly very, very huge. And then also there was a discovery of a giant skull in China. I don't know if you heard about that. It's called Homo longi, or dragon skull. This gentleman who was building a bridge, this was back in the 30s, he was under forced labor by the Japanese in that area of China, and he found this giant skull, and he hid it. He put it in a well, and this man lived to a very, very old age, and on his deathbed, he told his children, he said, I found this skull many years ago. I put it in the well. This is where you go find it. So they went and retrieved this skull, and it's huge. And they brought it to a local university there, and they started doing testing. And these scientists are saying that this corresponds, that this is a skull of a Denisovan, and it matches the DNA sequencing of the tooth and the knuckle bone found in Siberia.
That is very interesting. Were these giants actually gods?
Oh, well, I don't think so at all. Maybe they thought they were the gods with the little g's, right? They weren't the god in my book to the big G, but being of bigger stature and massively strong, that you can easily see how they would impose their will upon those people around them and subjugate them. And most accounts of them is that a lot of them were very evil. They were vile. The Bible talks about how evil the giants were. And many other cultures. I mean, even in fairy tale, right? Jack and the Beanstalk. These fairy tales, right? He wasn't a nice giant. He said, "What fee fi fo fum? I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he live or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." So even in fairy tales, what does that link to? Cannibalism, right?
It does. And even in biblical times, in the Bible, we talk about the giants. And, again, I would think humans at that time frame, even at Lovelock, the tribe around there, yeah, would look at them as maybe gods in a way, from the standpoint, because, humans always had to believe in some type of god, be it the fire god, the water god, the god of the mountain, the god of the volcano, without believing in some type of god, humans would have no way, no place to go.
Well, that's a really interesting point, Gary, and you just reminded me of another article that I found that I included in my book, and I think it's in Nevada along a river. I think it's called the Truckee River, but it mentions a giant footprints that were kind of fossilized
Mm-hmm.
near the riverbed, and the Native Americans had a tradition that they would keep those prints cleaned. If there was weeds or anything overgrowing them, they would clean it so that it would keep those prints, so it would people could visibly see those prints. So there was some type of respect or some type of tradition to do that.
But when you really, again, when we talk about, what happened at Lovelock,
Hmm.
and the pockets, the same way like with Bigfoot, I believe there's pockets all over the
Yes.
world of
Hmm.
Bigfoot, out in the forest really deep, again, with
Yeah.
the giants. I really think that, just because they got killed off in Lovelock or and
Yeah.
other supposedly situations,
Mhm.
well, I think that the odds are some of them surviving is quite, and then I really think that people would, in some cases, uh, mix a Bigfoot with
Yes.
a giant.
Absolutely, Gary. And we'll look at Neanderthal, for example. Originally, they were thought to have been killed out, but really now with DNA testing and everything, we are finding that they were probably a lot of them were killed out, but they were really bred out, right? Because many of us do have Neanderthal DNA in us. Obviously, some more than others, right?
Yeah, a lot of politicians do.
Yeah. Yeah, and now I had mentioned the Denisovans, these potential this potential hominid species that could have been giants. They're finding out that they were interbreeding with Neanderthal and humans. So you have this intermixing of DNA from these Denisovans and from Neanderthal and from our ancestors all being intermixed. And what did that produce? What hybrids did that produce?
Well, I think it advanced our human, what we are. I really do think we have that mixture in us.
Mm. Well, Gary, that's it's a possibility because there are still some people that have gigantism. There are people that have double rows of teeth. It's not very common, but there are some people that have that and extra digits on their hands and toes. I reference a particular tribe in South America in my book, the Warani tribe, and they have high incidences of a double set of teeth and six digits on their hands, and they're very violent. Their tribe, they're in constant tribal warfare. Now they're not giant, as far as height wise, but it is interesting that they have the double set of teeth and the extra digits on the hands.
Well, again, from interbreeding and all this stuff over thousands of years, hundreds of years,
Hmm.
I think that could be the answer. And some of them are born yet with the double row of teeth. And again, when you think of double row of teeth, it's not from going to eating corn, or eating
Right.
vegetation. It's about really consuming that steak.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I did see a recent article on the Homo longi skull that I mentioned in Siberia, the Denisovan, and now they also gave it another name called the Harbin skull. And what they did is, based upon the structure of this skull that they have out of China, they reconstructed it to try to make it look like, well, what did this person look like? And so I saw this article, and the picture of it looked like a Klingon from Star Trek with a super super broad nose. It looked almost exactly like a Klingon without the ridges on the forehead.
That's very interesting. But, again, like when I was in high school, I was looking at all these, and we're talking, years ago.
Hmm.
But, again, I was looking at all these, skeletons or so-called of giants. And
Hmm.
we're talking, 7, 8, 9 feet tall giant skulls that are
Yeah.
3, 4 times the size of my skull. So that,
Right.
again, with the wide eye opening,
Yes.
again, a mixture of like a humanity and something else.
Right. An intermixing of DNA.
How can we prove that these have existed? And is there anybody out there trying to find if any of them do exist? I mean, there's people out looking all the time for Bigfoot, dogmen. Is
Yeah.
there any groups out there that you're aware of looking for giants?
I imagine that there are. I know there's a lot with Bigfoot. I mean, even out in the area where I live, there are a number of different groups. In fact, I met an individual. He was a younger gentleman. He was an anthropologist, and he shared with me he saw three Bigfoot. He saw a mother and a few juveniles.
And again, was he scared when he saw him? Did he tell you?
He didn't mention that he was scared. I mean, he was obviously he was stunned, what he was witnessing. I think this was in the past, like within the past 4 or 5 years that this happened.
Well, here's the thing, even with Bigfoot, and it would tie into the giants too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people look at them as almost like human. They look at them like they give off orbs, they can telecommunicate. They would never hurt a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my listeners know about my encounter. I didn't have a friendly encounter. Look at how many people go missing deep in the forest, hunters and all that. So there is things out there we don't know. And I just can't believe a civilization of giants could all totally die off the same way than the case with Bigfoot would be all died off.
Exactly, Gary. Well, David Paulides, missing 411?
Right.
He talks a lot about what you mentioned, Gary, with all these disappearances in the national forest under sometimes very, very mysterious circumstances. What's all that about?
Well, something is going on, and why are these people being found? And some of the weirdness, again, a Bigfoot is not a human, but again, a giant, again, could be classified as a hairy man, maybe a big, huge, hairy man. But again, some of these people, in the 411 that David has wrote about is when they have found the remains of the bodies. A lot of the time, the clothes are taken off, neatly folded, and by the body. So that takes intelligence.
It takes intelligence. And if I remember correctly, too, it's like the searchers have already covered a certain area, and then they go back through and they find them in the very area that they had already previously searched. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it's like they're planted there, just to show it. But again, like in this cave, Lovelock, how are these American natives taken? Did the giants come running through the village and just grab the women and the babies, or did they grab men too, or was it women and babies more their delicacy? I hate to use that word.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics on that, but I mean, I know probably the Paiute, the parents would warn the children, not to stray too far away. So to me, it would seem likely that they would try to first go after the weaker, the ones that they can get to easily. But they were, Sarah Winnemucca, in her accounts of these red-haired giants, I mean, they were fierce in battle. They would, arrows shot at them, they would try to catch the arrows. They were quick. They would try to catch the arrows and shoot the arrows back at whoever was sending them their way.
I'm going to take like 1 or 2 phone calls. If anybody wants to call in and ask Floyd a question about these red-haired giants, again, the phone line. In fact, just give us a call and I'll put you on and you can ask Floyd a question. Again, with these giants, how can we prove that they really existed? I mean, what can we do as individuals if we want to prove that they did happen? They were alive.
Yeah, and that's, aside from, I mean, it's difficult if we can't have access to the actual remains. However, we can just share research on the oral traditions, any eyewitness accounts, any kind of documented evidence in the form of newspaper articles. That's kind of what I tried to do in my book, was just put forth the evidence that I came across, and not say that yes, definitely, they exist. This is just what I believe, and I'm just sharing with you the evidence that I found. And I leave it up to the reader to come to their own conclusions. But I think with all culturally throughout the world, about John.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting hit by the sunspots because you're freezing up there. I think we have a caller. Who do we have?
Hi, this is Barb.
Hi, Barb. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, Barb.
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm fine. You got a question for Floyd?
Yeah. I've been wondering ever since you started talking about the giants, is there any evidence in any of the bones that they found, or in any of the stories from the Paiutes, that any of the giants were female?
Good question. I haven't come across any evidence that they were female. There is some mention that some of the skeletons that did come out of Lovelock Cave were much smaller than the males. However, they were never put on public display. But in the archaeological record, it says that the females were definitely smaller than the males.
Well, that was a good question, Barb. And who do we have on the other line here?
We got Artie.
Hi, Art. How are you doing tonight?
Okay. Yeah, this is a subject that I don't have too much on, but I watched a few shows on television where the witness said that they would see something like a Sasquatch or something hairy, and then they would see when they tried to chase it, they would get a green flash, and then they wouldn't find it; it would disappear. My question would be, do they have? Or they would be there and then they would fall asleep. They'd be like if they were mind controlled. Is there any relation to that with the red giants? And that'll be it. I'll take it off the air. Thank you.
That's an excellent question. And I didn't come across anything except it brings me back to, I mentioned earlier, I had interviewed my neighbor that encountered a Bigfoot. And he did mention that he felt like something was going on with his mind when he was during this second encounter. He told me, Floyd, it's like something was messing with my mind.
Very interesting. Now, Floyd, do you have a website or a book or anything you want to share?
Yes, absolutely. My website's at www.redhairedgiants.com. And on that website, I have a chapter breakdown of my book. It'll give you a lot more information on what's in there. And also, you can purchase my book at bookbaby.com. I'm a self-published author. And so if people are interested in my book, I'd appreciate it if you go there and purchase it, because BookBaby really supports self-published authors. And you could also get it on Amazon as well.
Okay, I think we got one more caller before we end the show. Who do we have?
This is Tom.
Hi, Tom. Are you staying out of trouble on a Saturday night?
Yeah, I'm too sick to do anything else.
I thought you were getting better.
I am getting better, but I'm not over it yet. So probably another 48 hours, and I'll be getting into trouble.
You got a question for Floyd?
Yeah, quickly. I've read several accounts, and I don't know how credible they are. Plus, I've seen a documentary on YouTube about the red-haired Kandahar giant that allegedly took out a squad of U.S. infantrymen, and it took another squad to go in, and they had to expend most of their ammunition to finally take this thing down. Yes. And they ended up taking the body and putting it on a C-130 and taking it to Wright Pat Air Force Base. Do you know anything about that?
I have heard the story. I did watch an interview of one of the alleged soldiers that was involved with that. His face was kind of blacked out on the interview, but at the time I forwarded that interview to a friend of mine who is a counterintelligence agent for the Army, and I just wanted his opinion on it. And what he told me was that man that they were interviewing regarding the red-haired giant incident, he said that man believed in what he was saying. He seemed He seemed like there was some credibility, but that's pretty much all that he said. So it's kind of hard, evidence-wise, if it's just, you're getting the story from different people and you don't really have too much beyond that. But I definitely hold out the possibility that really happened.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Well, hey, Floyd, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show here tonight. That hour just went by so fast. If you get a hold of my producer, send him over the links and stuff of your book. I will put it up on our website. Thank
you so much, Gary. It's been an absolute pleasure. I had a blast, and thanks again to your audience for tuning in. That hour flew by really quick. Well, it's a lot better than talking about Bigfoot. So, I mean, yeah, we covered a lot. My feeling is, honestly, Floyd, I think somewhere deep in the woods, someplace, that these giants still exist. I would agree with you, Gary. I really do. I think there's a remnant of them left. I do. My friend, you take care, will you? You take good care, Gary. It's been a pleasure. Okay, my friend, you take care. Bye-bye. Bye. Well, you know what? We're going to be ending the show here shortly, but if you really look at it, we're going to start doing this like every other Saturday. If we get enough people, we'll do it every Saturday. That's up to you. But, again, we want to make the show really intriguing. Have you noticed the quality of our guests have really gone up, and we're covering more subjects? Again, it's very important for you out there to, again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it. Give us a thumbs up, and please, our sponsors, that's what pays for the show. They look at the comments, and if they don't see much comments, maybe we won't have the sponsors much longer. So it's important always to leave a comment if you like the show, like the guests, or whatever. And if you want to hear somebody else or see somebody else on the show, put it in a comment, and we'll try to book them. Again, I want to say, wow, we're lucky we did not lose any satellites this weekend. It's not over yet, but we're getting hit with the hottest solar flares in 19 years going on through tomorrow. And maybe that's why our guest tonight, he froze up. It wasn't on my end. He froze up. And I was doing everything I could not to lose the audio with him here tonight. Again, I want to say, well, thank you, Tom, Art, Barb, and we had a bunch of new people on a chat tonight. I want to thank all of you out there, and you're all official Night Dreamers. Well, until next Thursday, everybody have a good one. Tell your friends about the show, and you have a great weekend.
Who's friends with all the night dreamers, talking to you at night? Gary on the radio, but maybe he's not in sight. Bigfoot's on his tail, flying UFOs, that's right. Gary's Talk Show Radio, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Dreamers Talk Show will fix your despair. If you want to talk conspiracies, Night Dreamers.
Take a journey of adventure and discovery for the enigmatic giants of the forests. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. The author himself describes it this way. Having found possible Sasquatch evidence, namely trees driven into the ground upside down, thought to be territory markers, led me to investigate this creature in my native Ohio. Several years and many forays into Bigfoot territory, I have found incredible evidence, which inspired my book, On the Trail of Bigfoot. Bigfoot is alive and has many fantastic abilities. The evidence is out there for all to see, but you need to know what to look for. My book will inspire those who have answered the call to seek this elusive creature, the Bigfoot. The truth is out there. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. Available now at Amazon.